have recently finished She Persisted in Sports. It's the third book in the She Persisted series, and it's one that I am especially proud to be bringing into the world as someone who has long been inspired by athletes, even though I myself am only like barely an amateur athlete. So many of the women that I profile in the book are women that I looked up to when I was a kid, or they're women that I'm so grateful that are now in the world, kind of proving what's possible, creating what's possible, and are now role models for my children. And I think it's important equally for my daughter and my sons, for children of any gender, to have strong women role models, especially women athletes, to look up to. I wrote the first She Persisted book in 2017, both in reaction to a specific moment, kind of, and an answer to a challenge, that I really saw as a still relatively new mom. So also had felt in the preceding couple of years, like as a new mom, reading books to my daughter Charlotte, who at the time was 2.5, and my infant son Aiden, just realized how many of the children's books were centered on and told through male kind of voices and gazes. Even so many of the books around animal characters were kind of told through kind of male ducks or male cows or male frogs. And I wanted there to be kind of more women injected into the pages of children's storybooks, because I think children's books are often the first way we say to kids, like, here's what's possible, or here's what isn't, or here's where we see you, or here's where we don't. And so wanted to share stories of American women who'd inspired me, really for my kids, but for any young reader. And wrote the first She Persisted, and then wanted to share stories of women around the world that had really inspired me, or that I kind of had known from friends had really inspired them as they were growing up across the globe. And so wrote She Persisted Around the World. And then kind of as I was just thinking about what kind of felt like the next step as someone who is such a kind of avid sports fan, really wanted to kind of do something in sports, initially also partly galvanized by the Olympics, which clearly has been delayed for 2020, possibly for next year, although possibly not, depending on what's happening kind of with our COVID crisis around the world. And so just am so thankful that I've had the chance to continue to share stories of strong, persistent, kind of mighty women into the world, including through She Persisted in Sports. I do not think that Americans have a unique claim to ingenuity. I do think, though, it's important that we kind of celebrate, amplify examples of American ingenuity, to not only kind of recognize people's achievements and accomplishments for what they are, but also to really inspire young people today, to help young people kind of see themselves in kind of very real examples and exemplars of ingenuity, and then hopefully to kind of imagine themselves kind of into kind of their own expressions of ingenuity, whether that's kind of on the playground whenever kids are back in school, kind of in the classroom, again, when kids are back in school, or kind of as they kind of imagine and then architect kind of their own lives forward. And I certainly think we see American ingenuity in sports. And I think about, some of the women that I highlight in She Persisted in Sports, whether kind of Wilma Rudolph, who kind of overcame multiple illnesses and challenges as a child, and kind of went on to kind of prove what was possible for kind of Black women athletes, and kind of was the first kind of image that so many Americans saw on their television screens of a kind of fierce, unapologetic, strong, successful Black woman athlete, and possibly for many white Americans, just a Black woman kind of achieving and proving what was possible kind of through her own brand of American ingenuity. So I do think again, the stories that we tell our children are so profoundly important for kind of what they understand about American history and kind of what it has meant to always be walking, hopefully, toward a more perfect union in all the ways that we have been so deeply imperfect, kind of since our earliest days and kind of every day since, and also the people who have been trying to help bring us forward to a more just, equitable, healthy, sustainable place. And while I think so often we think of ingenuity as being the province of our scientists or our creatives, whether authors or um, filmmakers, visual artists, artists, I think it's also really important that we recognize kind of ingenuity can come in the way someone teaches a class, or in the way kind of someone races across a finish line. I absolutely read my books, drafts of my books to my kids. And when they were kind of maybe too little to offer kind of constructive criticism, I would read them to my nieces and nephews and other young people in my life. And I'm so grateful that Charlotte and Aiden, Jasper's just one. So kind of he just giggles and claps at everything. And so arguably he's the best and most unhelpful audience member or, prospective reader. Uh, in that Charlotte and Aiden, also both now can read on their own. And so, I'm so proud when they like pull my books off the shelf and want to keep reading them. And also just I'm so thankful for their kind of thoughtful engagement, like when I'm working on drafts and when they say like, oh, I don't quite understand that. And I realize, okay, I need to express the same idea in more accessible language for young readers, or when, I'm writing something and they're like, oh, that can't be true. Like, why did they say she couldn't do that? And I was like, well, unfortunately, like not that long ago, and still in some places in our country today, there are people who think girls like shouldn't wear shorts. And then it makes it really hard if you're playing certain sports, or who think that girls like always should kind of stand behind boys if there's a limit on how much kind of a school can do in terms of possible athletics, and think like it's more important for boys than girls. I'm like, oh, that's not fair. I'm like, I totally agree. Or, they think that like girls who maybe bodies are shaped a certain way, like shouldn't get to play this sport or that sport, or that, girls who wear hijab shouldn't get to play any sport, or that kind of girls who may have a disability somehow shouldn't have the same rights to compete. And I am thankfully like very proud every time they're like, that's not right. That's not right. That's not fair. That's not okay. And I'm like, yes, exactly. Because I think part of these stories for me are both to inspire kids to think and to see themselves, to visualize themselves like, in these character stories, so that hopefully they are unafraid and unapologetic on the sports field, whatever kind of that field may be. And also to think like, that isn't right. I don't think it's okay that these girls were told they couldn't do something because of the time in which they lived, or because of how they looked, or kind of what they choose to wear, or kind of what sport they choose to compete in. So, both of those reactions really matter to me. Yes, like I can do this. And yes, I'm not going to let anyone tell me or anyone else that we can't do this. Alexandra Boiger is just a genius and extraordinary human being. And I am so grateful to be able to work kind of on the She Persisted series with her. When I decided to kind of write the first She Persisted, I knew that I wanted to work with an illustrator, and I certainly hoped I would be able to work with an illustrator who could ensure there was kind of an earnestness and a seriousness, and also yet still a warmth and an accessibility, even a whimsy kind of in the images, because I wanted kids to feel kind of galvanized but not intimidated by the images. And we've long loved the Tallulah Ballerina series in our family, which Alexandra illustrated. And kind of that's when I first got to know her work, and just talking to my wonderful editor, Jill Santopolo, who also has been such an essential part of all of these books and helping them kind of be what they are in every sense. Jill thankfully kind of understood kind of what I was hoping for. And she also really was a fan of Alexandra's. And so we approached her asking her if she would be interested and if she would have capacity. And thankfully, she said yes, emphatically. And it's just been such a joy to work with Alexandra and to kind of really go back and forth together as we try to ensure that kind of the text and the images are are both complementary, but hopefully also kind of, really the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And uh, I couldn't now imagine She Persisted without her. And I'm so thankful that she's really become a friend throughout this process. And I'm looking forward to kind of more work together in the future. So I'm thrilled that next year we're having chapter books for all of the kind of women that were profiled in the first She Persisted. So there are 13 chapter books coming out, kind of one each month, and then two in the month of December. And I'm so thankful to all of the authors who have really kind of brought a more full portrait of these extraordinary women to life, and have been really lucky to kind of read probably half of them and look forward to reading the other half. And I'm so excited that kind of those will be coming out starting in January, and very much kind of already thinking about kind of the next She Persisted. I have been asked kind of tongue in cheek, but rather frequently, like if there would be, since there was a She Persisted kind of in the US and then the globe, like whether or not there would be one kind of for outer space. So I've been really thinking about kind of Sally Ride and Mae Jemison and some of the women who really inspire me who have been astronauts. I've also been thinking about so many of the women whose work inspires me, probably not surprisingly these days, in public health and medicine, including the great Dr. Flossie Wong Stahl, who unfortunately just recently passed away. He was kind of one of the world's greatest HIV/AIDS researchers and was part of the kind of original team in the 1980s that helped kind of really first decode the viral architecture of HIV, and also was an extraordinarily kind of brilliant and important part of all the science around hepatitis. And so would kind of love to have a book about kind of women in medicine and public health, or maybe women in science more broadly. So kind of lots of ideas floating around. So certainly kind of more to come. Not sure kind of what more will come first or next. I love to write and could not imagine my life without writing. And I'm so just grateful and humble and excited that I kind of get to write in the different ways that I really want to do and that are important to me. So that I write children's books, which have such deep meaning to me as a parent and also just as a citizen in the world. I write kind of global health books, articles, pieces, because that also has deep meaning to me as a parent and citizen in the world, albeit kind of in a different way. My writing process, though, for kind of these kind of different types of writing and kind of different types of product in the world, though, is pretty similar. Like I need a lot of time to really kind of think about kind of what I'm writing. I really believe in outlining. Like I still outline like all the skills that I think like Mrs. Kelly started to teach me in 5th grade, like still have utility for me today, 30 years later, maybe not quite 30 years later, but almost 3 decades later. And so I outline, I then like think some more, I start to kind of jot down thoughts, and then I really just start to write. And I probably spend most of my time, admittedly, in the kind of outlining and kind of architecture phase, and then in the editing. Like I find the words often like flow once I've really kind of developed the skeleton of what I hope to kind of do. And then I need a lot of editing because there are always too many words. It's always too verbose. It always needs like really kind of paring down, kind of tightening, really I care a lot about finding like the right words, ensuring that I'm saying not only kind of what I want to say, but that it's clear kind of why I'm saying it, and that, hopefully, um, depending on the audience, it feels not only kind of like worth their time and sincere, but is accessible. Because I don't want, kids especially to be like too hung up on like having to look up a word. I mean, I like hopefully maybe if they have to look up one or two words, like that, I think is probably a fun way to kind of stretch and learn while hopefully they're being engaged with the material, but not like, two words in the same sentence. So, it is just a real process for me. And it's a pretty similar one, whether I'm, trying to write a piece these days about kind of why I think it's important for the United States to stay in the World Health Organization, or kind of working on my next kid's book. It's not too dissimilar, even though the audiences may be pretty different. I hope you enjoy She Persisted in sports, and I hope that if you have books that you think we should be reading with my kids, I hope you'll send those recommendations my way.